We are here with our second Year of YA book chat, and our first one we just did about a week ago, and it was on Sabaa Tahir's An Ember in the Ashes. So if you missed that, make sure you go back and find that. This is something that we decided to add as we celebrated our first year of Year of YA. We wanted to add a little bit something else, and so every month, Tavi and I are going to read the same book during our theme, and then record ourselves kind of having a chat about it. But it's not supposed to be just the two of us chatting. We really want you to engage with us. So view the video and then react. We're always going to have elements that you can hopefully go on Twitter or use the blog post and share some of your thoughts and ideas. So without further ado, we are going to book chat today about Alex Gino's George, which is a middle grade novel. So we're going to start off with our first segment, which is the 30-second sell. So George wants to be the star in the fourth grade production of Charlotte's Web. And he doesn't want to be Wilbur. He wants to be Charlotte. But classmates say that girls can only play that part because Charlotte's a girl. George, however, is a girl, even if his biological makeup was male. He was equipped with passion, perseverance, and an amazing best friend. George sets off on a journey to let the world know who she really is.
Okay, so that was a perfect 30-second sell. I feel like I don't really know how to follow that up. So what I'm going to say is that one of the things that drew me to this book, since I primarily read young adult because I am in high school, I don't read a ton of children's lit, and I was really drawn into the fact that this story is just really simple and honest. I don't feel like it's necessarily trying to teach you a lesson. Like, that's not in your face. It's just telling you this simple, honest story about this girl named George, who is really Melissa, and, you know, her journey to try to share that with the world. One thing that I really do want to add about this book, as far as selling it, I would really love in my school to sell it as a class read aloud. I think that with high school kids, sometimes books that are shorter and have a pretty easy reading level work really, really great for read alouds. They capture listeners right away, and it's easy for all of the listeners to sort of comprehend what's going on and stick with the story. And I think that by using this as a read aloud in high school, even middle school, it would open up the door to important conversations about empathy and diversity. And because the main character is in fourth grade, I think that you know, it would give the students a different perspective. You know, it would let them see this from a child's viewpoint, see the innocence, and that might also help with building empathy.
All right, so let's elaborate a little bit more. And I love your point that this is simple. Like, I think we should start there. Like, this is a book that is written for children. Mm-hmm. And so it's just telling a story. There's really not an agenda. I thought, you know, again, like, without giving too much away, the parent part of this is not really, like, there's not a battle in the community over whether or not they should use the bathroom. Like, it is simply this one character inside her mind, how she relates with her classmates, and it's like an everyday story. I mean, you know, I remember, this is kind of a big jump, but I remember when Lori Halsey Anderson's Speak came out, and, like, that was wild. She was talking about rape, and oh my goodness, you know, like, what a big topic to talk about. And now it shows up all the time, you know, 15, 20 years later, it shows up all the time in literature. And so that's for children, for teens. But, you know, I think that this is a good reminder that it is part of everyday life for a lot of kids. And so it's important that we remember that it's written for kids.
Yeah, and I like that. I feel like the book does a really good job of showing that this isn't a phase, you know, and you know, that this is something that George is really dealing with and struggling with. To her, being female in a male body is completely normal. That's her norm. That's, her life. But I really like that it doesn't push it as like this is a phase that some little kid is going to grow out of. Like, I think that that's really good.
And I think too, like going off of that, without reading the book, I would imagine that there's a lot of adults that are going to be haters. Like that was my first thought with this. Like as soon as they hear what this book's about, they're gonna be like, "Don't put that in my library," or "Don't put that in my children's library." It's like I think that if you read this book or you bring it into your library, or your classroom, like be prepared for that. But I think the biggest argument as to why it should be there, without getting political, is to say read the book.
Yeah.
Read the book, because there isn't anything. There's other books with transgendered characters that I've read that I'm a little like, okay, not really elementary appropriate, just based on language and some other things that happen. But, to me, putting this book in a library or a classroom, there's too many kids that don't have representation. And this is one voice. I mean, this is one kid's story. And I think that if you get a hater or somebody that is going to be apprehensive about this book, if you get them to read it, they're going to hear and feel a little bit of that empathy of what we're talking about. That this is just a very basic, I hate to say basic because it's not, it's not bells and whistles and anything crazy. It's just a kid's life and how he's trying to fit in as a she,
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you wouldn't necessarily find this book in a high school library because the main character is 4th grade. But for me, I'm definitely going to add it to my library. And I have all kinds of books with, the main characters are younger. I don't really discriminate. I think that if it's a good story and it could be valuable to my kids, I add it to the library. But I think that it is important because as librarians, as teachers, as educators, it's part of our duty to serve all of our students. And, your bias or your political views or your beliefs aside, you're there for all of the kids, not just the ones that you agree with, their identity or how they identify or their belief system. We have to be there for everyone. And so our libraries really should reflect all of our students' voices and voices that we might not know are there. But that could be there, that, just haven't been revealed to us yet. So definitely going to add it to my library. I do think that I could certainly sell this book to a lot of kids and hopefully some teachers, maybe to do some read-alouds.
Yeah, I hope so too. One of the things that I read the New York Times review of this book, and I loved that it was Tim Federle who did it, because I'm kind of author crushing right now on him. I've read, not only did I read The Great American Whatever, but then I sought out his story in a young adult collection, and I just love his voice, whether it's through a character or not. But I love that he was the one that reviewed this book, and one of the things that he said was about that, the concern that people are going to have over this book. And he said, also trust that when you tell a contemporary child, so kid in 2016 who's been hearing about the HB2 bill in North Carolina, where we work, he's hearing about, kids are hearing about that, they're hearing about Caitlyn Jenner. It's part of their everyday world. Mm-hmm. So he said, when you tell a contemporary child that some people are born into a body that they don't identify with, most will blink and say, okay, cool, what's for dinner? It's so true. I mean, our kids just are not fazed by it because it's not an agenda for them. It's not earth-shattering for them. So I love that when we remember that these books are for kids, that we have to take away our perspectives and our life complexity and remember that this is who they're written for. And I just think that was beautifully said, and I think that Alex Gina, the author, that's exactly the point was trying to get across through Melissa's story.
Yeah, and I think that even kids who aren't transgender, who don't identify that way, would still be able to learn from George and gain strength from the story, because whether you're transgender or whatever you are that you feel like you have to hide, I think that kids could really benefit from reading about how, you just be yourself. You just have to be yourself, and you have to just trust that the people that you love are going to accept that, and you know, tackle tackle it if they don't, whatever. But I just think that it's just a story that everyone can relate to in some way, whether you're transgender or not. And I think that that's partly due to the fact that it is such an honest and simple story.
All right, so I'm going to try to bridge us from what we've been talking about to something that you put on that you wanted to talk about that I think is really important with this book. But another quote, I've read a lot about this because I wanted to see what other people were putting out there. And NPR did a little review of this as well, and they said, like much of the best children's literature, George is about being true to who you are, being kind, and learning about people both different and maybe similar to you. So that is exactly what we're saying, that this book is not just for a transgender kid. Don't single out the one transgender kid you know and say, I have one book for you. It's a book for anybody. So with that in mind, if you would bring up kind of what we talked about or what you were thinking with gender roles, because I think that really plays into the kids who aren't transgendered but would read this and hear about a kid who's like, I want to be in the play, but I don't want to play who they say I have to play.
Right. So when I was reading, one of the things that really stuck out to me was the idea of gender roles. And I don't know why, it felt like every page, because so much of it took place while they were at school. Mm-hmm. It was just, the gender roles were so prevalent. And I don't know, I don't feel like, not that I don't see that as much in high school, because it's obviously there. It's there. But I don't know if maybe it's because it was elementary school, but it just really stuck out to me. There was so much where it was, this is for boys or this is for girls, or the boys line up here to go to the bus and the girls line up here to go to the bus, or the boys line up to go to the bathroom and the girls line up to go to the bathroom, as opposed to everybody just lining up together and because you're going to the same destination. Mm-hmm. Books for boys and books for girls, and boys do this and girls do that. I just felt like, I don't feel like it wasn't done in a way where it was like a blatant agenda, but it was just so beautifully told. I mean, it was just like real life, like I would walk into an elementary school and this is what I would see. But it just started making me think about, how in saying that and assigning these gender roles, sometimes we do unknowing damage. To students. And, I never really thought about how often we do say this is for boys or this is for girls. And I just think it's something, this book made me feel like it's just something to be aware of, and to try to bring more awareness to, especially when we think about students, whether they're elementary school or high school, that might be confused about who they are or where they fit into our world. There are transgender students at my school, and it's very interesting when you start thinking about gender roles, and how that could affect them, even though you're innocently saying something, but it could do a lot of damage to them and confuse them further. So I just thought that was really interesting. I don't know if, he was going for that. I don't know if that was something that he wanted us to think about while reading, but it definitely stuck out to me a lot.
Yeah, well, and hearing you talk about that, I am not transgendered, so I can't understand the conflict of what Melissa was feeling every day in school. But I was a tomboy growing up, like a big time tomboy, and even now when I'm 30 years old, I tell people I played little league baseball, and they're like, "Oh, you played softball?" No, I played like baseball, like with the boys. And then I say, "Oh, I played hockey." "Oh, you played field hockey?" "No, I wore ice skates," and so it's still hard now as a 30-year-old, like having to explain to people I was an athlete and that girls play these sports too. And it's frustrating for me as an athlete. Like, I think that there's the flip side of that is this theater, the theater idea where, even now, like, to put somebody, whether or not it's a situation like George and Melissa, where, it looks like a boy and he wants to play a girl. I think that it's something that we should be a little bit more open to, and I think the first thing I thought about with that was Peter Pan.
Right.
Traditionally, Peter Pan is played by a female, and we just did a local show here, and a female, actually two females, played Peter Pan. So to me, why is that okay? But if a boy wants to play Charlotte in Charlotte's Web, regardless if it's gender, maybe he's not even motivated because it's a girl. Maybe he just likes Charlotte better than Will. And I think you make a really great point that it's very innocent sometimes, whether it's sports or other activities. And when we say it to a student, oh, that's a boy sport, or, oh, that's a role for girls. It's not, doesn't have to be political. It doesn't have to be some kind of agenda behind it. But we sometimes say it without, because we're used to hearing it.
We're conditioned. I mean, society, everything about our society conditions us to be that way. Exactly. I mean, if you think about just in the library, I mean, how many times have you made displays that might be like, more specific for boys? It might even have the word boys on it, more specific for girls, and it's completely innocent. It isn't in any way to say if you're a boy, you can't read these, books about romance, or if you're a girl, you can't read these books about whatever. But it's like it's conditioned.
Yeah. That's true. It's very true. And it's hard to break it, but I feel like if I can do one thing in the library to not condition books to be, this is a girl book and this is a boy book, then that's the one thing that I can contribute to the next generation not having that kind of gender split. I think it's a little thing, but it could go a long ways.
Yes, definitely.
All right, so one more thing I want to elaborate on. Really short, I promise. But I loved Kelly, and I want to tweet about her tonight during our chat. But she is like the best friend, and I don't want to give away too much. I feel like we've kind of talked a whole lot about what's going on in the story, but I just didn't want to miss Kelly, because she is just the most. She is that one that Tim Federley's like, okay, cool. You want to wear a skirt? What's for dinner? Like.
I loved her, and I loved, like, when the uncle came and took him, was it to the zoo or whatever, and she's like, here, put this on and put that. It's so accepting, and I just have to hope in my heart that that's how most little kids are. And that.
I love that she's written in there like that, because it might be the difference. To go back to Speak, I talk about this book all the time, because it was the difference maker with how I was able to approach a friend that had gone through abuse, and I couldn't understand, and there's so much felt like I couldn't approach her about. And so when I read this book, it kind of opened up the door to how a friend should act to somebody. And so that, she just totally stood out to me as she's going to be a role model to some kid who needs, this is how I should act towards this person.
That's exactly what I was going to say, and I think that's why like a read aloud with this could be so powerful, because whereas I feel like in my school most of my kids are probably not going to necessarily identify with George being transgender. That isn't, they're not transgender, so they won't necessarily they won't understand what George is going through in the sense of I've lived that. But I feel like there's so many more kids that will be able to identify with Kelly.
Yes.
And having a friend that's different from them in some way, whether it's, being transgender or whatever. So I love her too. She's wonderful.
Okay, so our whole summary of Elaborate is just be more like Kelly.
Yeah, we need t-shirts. Hashtag be more like Kelly.
Exactly. All right. You ready to move along?
Yeah, so we'll do Rita Likes now.
Perfect. All right, so the first one that I thought of is one that I've read recently, and it's called Lily and Duncan. And George is, like we said, a little bit more of an innocent view of what it's like in the head of a transgender child. Lily is older. Lily is definitely in middle school, has a lot more going on in her world, and there's some mature themes there. So when I read that one, I went, George, I'd feel comfortable with an elementary kid reading. Lillian Duncan is just a little bit more mature, in my opinion. But it is an excellent book, and what I loved about it was that, kind of like Kelly, Lily comes across somebody who is going through their own problems, but at the same time is a support for her. So I'm a big fan of Lillian Duncan.
And I just want to throw in really quick, I haven't read that yet. It's definitely on my to-be-read list. But even though it traditionally isn't really a high school book, I do have it in my library. So again, don't be afraid to include, elementary and middle school reads in the high school library.
Yeah, the themes in that could definitely carry over to high school. And when I say mature, it's not like, it's not a whole lot of romance or anything like that, but it is just some of the stuff they talk about. I would feel more comfortable with a middle school or high schooler reading it. And the writing is wonderful in that book. So I think a high schooler would really appreciate the way that it's written. And then two other ones that popped up in my head, they're not about transgendered or even gay, lesbian, anything. But they are ones that to me spoke about experience and being able to see the world outside of something, which I think a book like George does. Like, it kind of takes us out of our own experience and into somebody else's. And the two that stuck out to me were Sharon Draper's Out of My Mind, and Linda Mullally Hunt's Fish in a Tree. And those are both about students who are really misunderstood by their peers and by adults in their world, and they're really not given enough credit. So just the theme there really reminded me of George.
Yeah, and I have both of those in the library as well. Even though I don't know, well, I guess more young adult, but they are wonderful. And Out of My Mind, I have handed that to teachers so many times. That makes a great read aloud. If you need a class to read aloud, that one is wonderful for reading aloud to students. And just the conversations that it can bring about are really important. So that's a great suggestion. And we do want to also ask, because we do want this to be participatory, so do you have read-alike suggestions for George, whether they're elementary, middle school, more young adult, high school, doesn't matter, but we'd really like to hear from you and hear suggestions. So you can tweet them out with hashtag Year of Young Adult, or you can go to the blog post with the video and use the comment section to kind of join into the conversation.
Perfect. All right, so the last part is also participatory. We're hoping to get some people to give us their answers and their thoughts. So why don't you read us, if you've read it, answer this.
Okay, so it's interesting because this kind of bleeds right into read alike. So in the book, the whole book kind of centers around this play based on Charlotte's Web. So our question to you is, why do you think the author Alex Gino used Charlotte's Web as the play in his novel? Was it chosen specifically? What are your thoughts on that? And we're really interested because we have some opinions on that. So be very interested to see what you guys think. And maybe even that's something that could be used not necessarily as a read alike, but a read along with. I don't know. I don't know if that's a thing, but reading at the same time and trying to find maybe some commonalities. So,
again, back to shout out to Tim Federle, who, if he ever watches this, is gonna be scared of me. But he, in the New York Times Review, he talks about that he went back and read one of his his old copy of Charlotte's Web after reading this book, and he said it was like a whole new lens of reading the book. So that's a great idea, is maybe to read that book alongside with it, or at least passages from it if you're going to use it as a read aloud, because there's some commonalities there. So, all right, well, we're going to wrap it up. Feel free to comment back to us on the blog or on Twitter. Use hashtag Year of YA, and we're excited to hear what you guys think of George and our second Year of YA book chat.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in.